as audio goes.
Excellent. Okay, so first up we have John Cook and Sergei Samoilenko, and they'll be talking about character assassination in climate and misinformation. So
Great.
I thought I was last, but I'll take first, that's fine. This is the first time Serge has seen his slides, so he'll be just as surprised as the rest of you. So this is research by Serge and myself. We've been working on this for the last couple of years, sweating blood over this data. And my background is actually climate communication. I'm at the Centre for Climate Change Communication at George Mason University. And it's a rich field, but I could sum it up in 10 words, really. This is research by Ed Mayback and some of my colleagues. Everything that people need to know about climate change is essentially, it's real, it's us, it's bad, experts agree, but there's hope. We can solve climate change. My focus has been on misinformation about climate change, and there's been a lot of research over the last 2 decades into this area. Some of the earliest research was by Stefan Rahmstorff, who categorized the different types of arguments that we saw in climate misinformation, and he categorized them using 3 categories. Basically, he called them trend skepticism, attribution skepticism, and impact skepticism, or basically the mirror universe of the first 3 of the key climate beliefs. It's not real, it's not us, and it's not bad. Now, Stefan Rahmstorff is a climate scientist, so he was naturally interested in just misinformation about science. Since then, social scientists have started to broaden the categories. Some survey research added a 4th category, which was arguments against climate policy and climate solutions. And then more recently, 2 political scientists from the UK, Konstantin Bousalis and Travis Cohen, did topic analysis of conservative think tank articles. And they found that as well as those 4 categories, there was also a 5th category, attacks on the integrity of climate science. And there's a whole bunch of subcategories underneath these top-line categories as well, which I won't go into. But the interesting thing is there's a lot of research in my field into the first 4 categories, but very little into the 5th category. And so I started working with Bousalis and Cohen. Over the last 2 years, we've been training a machine to detect climate misinformation and categorize the type of misinformation. And once we trained the machine, we used it to build a history of climate misinformation. This is unpublished, we're still writing it up. But this is a basic summary of the history of climate misinformation over the last decade or so. And what we see is the 5th category, attacks on the integrity of science, is by far the most common type of climate misinformation. Compared to the others, it's always been top, apart from this one little shining moment in 2009 when policy arguments kind of got over there and then dropped back down again. And the interesting thing then is that disconnect between all the research into misinformation is looking at these 4 categories, whereas actual climate misinformation is much more focused on attacking the integrity of science. So to address this imbalance, CARP to the rescue. Serge studies this topic, and so we collaborated to look at character attacks on climate scientists and understand it better, and with our eventual goal being developing and testing interventions to respond and counter character attacks on climate scientists. We looked at a range of different frameworks in the character assassination literature, and we found that Doug Walton provided what really suited what we were trying to do nicely. He, in his book Ad hominem Arguments, he developed a taxonomy of all different types of ad hominems. This is kind of a simplified version of it, and we found that this was quite useful for what we were wanting to achieve, partly because it was a comprehensive taxonomy, but also because he took every ad hominem, deconstructed it into its starting assumptions or premises and conclusion, and then having deconstructed the ad hominem arguments, he posed critical questions that you could use to interrogate each argument to determine whether the argument had validity or not. this seemed like a useful approach for us down the track when we wanted to develop interventions to respond to character attacks on scientists. So what we did then is Sergei and I, using the machine learning research that I did with missiles and Cohen, we took a random selection of paragraphs attacking climate scientists, and we iteratively started to develop a code book on how to content analyze this content, which was harder than you would think. We started with Walton's taxonomy and saw how could that fit attacks on climate scientists, and gradually we narrowed it down to there was really 5 types of attacks that we were seeing in attacks on climate scientists, and they were direct attacks against scientists' competence. There were attacks against scientists' moral behaviour, attacks saying that scientists were biased, circumstantial attacks, which I characterise as really 2 types broadly. Either internally inconsistent, the scientists are inconsistent, there's an inconsistency between their words and their actions, or they're externally inconsistent, as in scientists who are inconsistent with the groups that they claim to belong to. And lastly, guilt by association. Associating scientists with other groups, usually political groups, and therefore tarring the scientists with the negative traits that the associated group contained. And so through this iterative process, we developed a code book, and this is just a little excerpt of it, where we had the main categories, different conditions where text would match one of those categories, and examples. And we developed this code book basically as an instruction manual for a group of coders that we recruited at George Mason University, some very willing volunteers in the debate club who, through a series of training exercises, we developed them to go through and content analyze a selection of paragraphs. And we also instructed them to identify emotive words in the text. This is just a word cloud of the words that they identified in the several hundred paragraphs that they content analyzed. And you get a sense of the type of attacks that were being used against climate scientists here. And they also quantify the number of the 5 different categories of attacks. Now, obviously, bias attacks are by far the most populous type of ad hominem against climate scientists. And let me give you a few exemplars of the types of attacks that we saw. Bias attacks usually were saying that climate scientists were politically motivated. Moral attacks talked about how there was a range of different moral activities that we identified, usually greed, being motivated by money, or attacking other scientists, or being deceptive, or attacking anyone, attacking critics. And competence, I won't go into that, that's not quite as interesting. But the other challenge we found was often attacks were combined. So a bias attack might say scientists are biased and therefore they behave badly. The combination between bias and competence attacks might say something like scientists that are biased, but they also don't know what they're doing. And so our challenge is how do we respond to either single types of ad hominem attacks, or how do you respond to these combo attacks, where they're kind of meshing several together. And just briefly talking about next steps, Walton has these critical questions, and what I found really attractive about this was in my other research prior to this, looking at science misinformation, I did something very similar. I would deconstruct science misinformation, and then identify the logical fallacy in it. And having done that, that allowed us to develop basically like inoculations, like what Josh was talking about, or these are kind of post-inoculations or therapeutic inoculations is what Josh would call them. And so we're testing logic-based debunkings, or even humour-based debunkings, also pointing at fallacies in arguments, but using parallel argumentation. And I will leave it there, and here's a very complicated cartoon for you to look at. Thank you.
And John just published a book of cartoons about climate misinformation.
Not quite. It's on its way.
Okay, thank you. I have some questions, so I will save those to the end. Next, we're doing Dean Zolius. I'm just reading the instructions. Dean, are you ready, or do you want? Okay, come on up. You'll be talking about reputational crossfire, conservatives on college campuses in the age of Antifa and the radical left.
Hi, this is gonna be interesting because I first thought I had 20 minutes, and I was told yesterday I was gonna have 15, and today I find out I've got 10. So, two things real quick. The first is that when you get this, you're gonna get two things. You're gonna get the slide presentation, and I've got a paper that goes along with it. There's a lot more in the paper. I wanted to give you a summary in the presentation. Now, the other thing that I want to mention here is there's a difference between this presentation and probably all the other ones you've seen this weekend. All the other ones are about character assassination, about people in Russia or people in Turkey, or for example, climate scientists, but they're people that are here. That's the difference. Today, I'm talking about character assassination targeted at me, targeted at my students. I've been labeled a racist. I've been labeled a hate monger. I've been labeled, basically alt-right. By the way, what's my sin? Which this is not working. What's my sin? I am the faculty advisor to the Cal State Fullerton College Republicans. And basically we are a conservative group on a very, very radically left liberal campus. So I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that we faced. Basically what I'm going to do is, I'm going to talk about the environment really quick. I'm going to talk about the challenges faced by conservative groups all over the country on college campuses. I'm going to talk about, what happened when we invited a conservative speaker in the face of the reputational attacks and the violence. And then last but not least, I'm going to give you, and in here, what I really want to focus on is I want to focus on the crisis management and reputational management strategies we use to diffuse the reputational attacks and to basically successfully host the speaker. So the thing I want to stress is this presentation again is different. We're talking, these are both the attacks on the reputation of an individual or individuals and on organizations. And basically it's not just a threat about, character assassination, it's also a threat of physical violence. This isn't hypothetical, this isn't theoretical. This has real world implications, for the university and for people. It's, one of the scariest things to do is know you're hosting an event, and then all of a sudden you're tracking Antifa-like groups, and they have calendars up on their pages that say, mark your calendars, we're going to be at this event. Here's the ski mask you buy with a protective lens over the face so the police can't use tear gas. Leave your IDs at home so the police can't arrest you. So this is real. And again, the police chief telling my students, understand that we can protect you on campus. They can come after you. You know what? You've seen the news, all right? This is not a pretty environment today for conservatives on college campuses. Whether it's, some poor student decides that he wants to wear his Make America Great Again hat, or how about the conservative student that got beaten recently at the University of Berkeley. Basically, conservative students are basically, they're shouted and they're basically abused into silence, or they're physically abused. And it's just a bad environment right now. What's sad is that college used to be the marketplace of ideas. They used to be seen as the place where you could share thought, that you could share freedom expression, that you could discuss ideas. Not anymore, because if you disagree with the liberal left, often what happens? Then you're committing hate speech. Now, there are radical groups, and they'll shut you down. But that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is these groups. This is Antifa, all right? The idea that speech we disagree with, the idea that speech that runs counter to what we believe is basically hate speech. But understand, what they're going to say is that, in California, we want to build a border wall. We need it. 18 cents out of every dollar we spend goes to illegals in California. That's almost 20% of our budget, all right? I say that, I'm a racist. I invite a man who is, by the way, he's gay and married to a black man, to my campus to speak. By the way, now I'm homophobic, and I am also a proponent of hate speech because he has been claimed to out illegals or people that are gay or trans. What I'm saying is that when they oppose you, now they say that you are a threat understand, these groups don't believe in dialogue. They believe that, you know what, that they have to use violence. Talking is not enough. And that's a problem, because basically once we get away from civil dialogue, our society's in trouble. You know what? Basically, what's funny is the groups that espouse tolerance are basically intolerant of any opinion that doesn't agree with theirs. The idea is that we're not going to just basically disagree. You know, as a conservative, I'm most a libertarian. You know what? If you don't want to see a speaker, don't come. If you don't like what's on television, turn the channel. If you don't like a movie, don't go. All right? No. The idea is we've got to shut you down. And it's not, by the way, just my campus. Here's a list. This was just 2017. In 2017, there were 6 different campuses. And of course, this is what happens. Antifa decides to show up, and they're going to make sure that they create a threat. You can see this now. They say, oh, this person is dangerous. If they come, there's going to be riots. Not telling you that they're going to riot. And then therefore, you know, you have to protect the campus. You've got to shut down the speech, and you suppress free speech. Well, on my campus, basically, we've got 2 antagonists, and it's going to really surprise you who it is. The first is, it's the faculty union, the California Faculty Association. Now, the little dirty secret on my campus is that they don't just operate alone, that they've got this group called Students for Quality Education. Now, here's the joke. If I put 20 students in a room and I said, come up with a club, the club name, I don't think that they would come up with Students for Quality Education. But this is an arm of the California Faculty Association. The problem is, as I was told by my administration in this conflict, is that they're not accountable to anybody. They're not a registered student group. A regular student group, they can say, hey, we can pull your budget. You can't meet here anymore. Not with these guys. They're basically led by a graduate intern. They identify as leftist socialists. They're very, very active. They protest. But the hardest part for us is they're linked to groups through ICANN that are Antifa-like. So I'm not just a professor up here complaining. Rather, this is through experience. So go back to 2017. SQE decided to have an anti-wall, anti-Trump rally. We decided for a peaceful counter-protest. We filled the paperwork with the school. The really important person to see here is the man in orange. Our school says, hey, you know what? You've got to have a chaperone. The chaperone from our school was there with both groups. We kept our distance. A professor didn't like the students. Videotape shows him clearly walking past my students, walking back, starts jawing with them. He calls them ignorant and stupid because they're students, all right? He was walking like this, trips over a bike rack and falls, and then laughed at him. He gets mad, gets up, strikes the students. The university, after, of course, conferring with their chaperone, they suspend him. He's later reinstated, but I want you to understand, so we've got this history of reputational attacks, but also of physical violence. Now, this is clear. This man did this. But you see, the union and the radical groups changed the narrative. What they say is that we were the aggressor. The faculty union sends emails to every faculty in our campus and across the CSU, 23 campuses, that basically that he was the victim of right-wing aggression. And then the scary part is that gets picked up by these radical groups that basically they are mobilizing when we invite a speaker in. And here you go, ready? That basically that we're McCarthy-like, all right? We're setting people up, provoking and fearing people for repression. We attack an adjunct instructor and then try to get him fired. Well, unfortunately, that rhetoric and those attacks, well, they take a toll, and now we have to face Antifa. So, our next event. We've got this issue on our campus. We're approached by some groups saying, you should host a conservative speaker. We do. We bring in Milo Yiannopoulos, very, very famous. Milo comes in, people say that he's offensive. You know what? That he's racist, that he's homophobic, by the way, he is gay. That he's dangerous to illegals because he disagrees with illegal immigration. So we're going to invite him. By the way, of course, our faculty union and SQE mobilized to condemn us. We're called racist. We're called propagators of hate. You name it, they wouldn't call us. They petition administration. They petition our academic senate. They petition the student government to have us condemned, to block the speaker. They protest. They have a media campaign. But, oh, it gets worse. They decide they're going to protest. They bring outside groups, and they invite Antifa. So how do we diffuse all this? I got 2 minutes. They basically try to say to create a threat. we use a simple strategy. The biggest here is transcendence, all right? It comes out of Benoit's typology. Some bigger, larger issue, and what do? We wrap ourselves up in the banner of freedom of speech. And what I've done in the presentation is I've given you how we did this, because it was very, very effective. Statements on campus, in the media, in the press, in interviews, social media posts. I've given you the position statements, that issue was about one thing and one thing only, free speech. In this case, free speech on college campuses. The Constitution promises free speech for all, and colleges and universities are a place for students to speak or they invite should be free to express their ideas. This was a really, really effective strategy. Here are the talking points. You now have them. We had a twist on this, a consistency appeal. The idea was this: the university saying, look, you have in your mission statement a statement about diversity and tolerance. Tolerance means you're tolerant of people of different political ideologies. So what we asked our university, said, look, it's not only freedom of speech, but if you believe in diversity, you believe in tolerance, you've got to basically believe in different types of political thought. One last important message: violence will not be tolerated. This is my second time as a crisis manager managing a large-scale effort like this, where you had an issue of could be violence. You know what? That was a really clear message we sent. Violence, protest, they could peacefully protest, but it wasn't going to be tolerated. So the school mobilized after what happened at Washington and Berkeley. We're talking mounted police, tactical police, SWAT, helicopters, armored cars, snipers. You know what? We had a successful event. You know what? Our university supported us. They bought the transcendence strategy. They didn't buy in. We attacked SQE and the faculty and saying, look, this is a radical leftist group. We showed them every time we had information, it got past the administration, it got past the police. So the idea is that we were prepared. We were able to limit the protests. We had a successful event. By the way, 819 people bought tickets. We sold the event out. So again, in the face of these attacks, what we found was things like denial, things like transcendence worked really, really well. If you can wrap yourself up in a bigger issue. How much time do I have left? I have what, 1 minute? Or what's that? Oh, okay, no minutes. Last point I want to make. The little surprise I got was Milo decided to send a prop casket. I never thought he'd send a real casket. One of my biggest challenges at the end of the night was, how do you get rid of a 200-pound casket that he's left behind? So we ended up having to move it off campus. Anyway, you have a copy of the paper. There's a full paper presentation, a full paper as well. Thank you.
I'm very happy that we're sticking to our time. Unlike some people, like myself. Okay, so now we have Farah Leda, who's doing Do Republican nope, now I'm gonna, fine, why don't you come down here? Come on down, because I'm making you do it again. I missed, sorry guys. Farah is gonna be doing Do Republican Politicians Gaslight the American Public on Climate Change? A qualitative analysis of Republican discourse surrounding the 2016 election. Thank you very much. Oops. Okay.
Hello. Hi. My name is Farah Latif. I'm representing Georgian University. Thank you all for being here. So I am intrigued with climate change. I understand climate change. There is this notion that a lot of the reason people will not support climate change is because of misinformation. And as we are learning, there is a lot of misinformation, but there are things being done about it. Yet, we have this partisanship about climate change, right? A lot of Republicans who do understand the science of climate change will yet continue to support leaders who are not doing much about climate change. We know 7 out of 10 Americans think climate change is real. 5 out of 10 believe that they have observed it. What is this phenomena? So I explored a little bit, and so I'll start with a story. So I'll start with a story of the naked emperor. We are all familiar with some version of the story. So a emperor passes through this kingdom and claiming that he's wearing a garb that's only visible to those who are of the noblest of birth and wisest of them all. What happens is he parades through, he's not wearing much of anything, people are surprised, nobody says anything. Something like this is happening regarding climate change. The reason I wanted to just touch base on fake news and post-truth era, no need to tell this group what that is, but we have developed some vulnerabilities for digesting truth. So yesterday I was hearing words such as true facts and untrue facts, and it was a little confusing for me. I heard someone rejecting alternative facts, which was great, but there were still untrue facts, true facts. But we have developed vulnerability for accepting information at face value without a lot of investigation. So I'm going to introduce this concept of gaslighting first. So it comes from theater background. It was a Hamilton's show in 1939. And basically he developed, the show was about people driving their relatives crazy so they could get rid of them and put them in insane asylums. And the American rendition of this play was a few years later in the movie called The Gaslight, where the husband marries this beautiful woman who's rich, but he has an alternative motive. If you look in the very corner over there, it says strange drama of a captive sweetheart. That kind of captures the essence of the movie. So he manipulates the wife into believing different things to the degree that she forgoes her own judgment about anything that happens and puts all his trust in him, and just let him decide for her. And eventually in the movie, the wife gets literally crazy. So that concept was picked up by a clinical psychologist and turned into a term used to explain phenomena such as a wife complaining to her husband about cheating or something, and 5 minutes later she is begging for mercy, crying, and telling her how sorry she is for being so stupid, right? So this term captures that idea of gaslighting. We get so caught up into trusting someone else that we let go of our own faculties. So I will help you with your imagination just a little bit, going back to the story of the naked emperor. Something similar to this is happening in climate change rhetoric. We are being told things that are not in fact true. So political gaslighting. This is my understanding, this is my definition of political gaslighting, where a strategy to deceive and manipulate information with the motivation to destabilize and disorient public opinion on political issues, and what is more populist issue these days than climate change. And to continue, actually, okay, I'll go with these as well. As a result of being gaslighted, voters, as I said before, let go of their own judgment about making decisions, continuing to elect officials who are not committed to climate change, despite their own concerns, despite their personal concerns about climate. And the outcome is over-reliance on climate change, or reliance on the leaders. So I wanted to go a little bit into how it is related to our topic of character assassination, and that's where I'm going to need some questions from you all and some of your comments, because I'm trying my best to make that connection. I've not been able to convince everyone just yet. When gaslighting happens, so obviously there is one victim, one group of victims as the public, and then there are those who are victimized in order to create that misinformation, who hold opposing views, including opposition leaders or climate scientists. And so I want to posit that it's reasonable to believe that gaslighting is a tactic used in strategic character assassination of opponents. So that's where I'm going to need some help. And just overviewing a lot of psychology literature, I have set on some of these antecedents, some grounds that are required for gaslighting to happen. And translating kind of these into political situations, isolated, being just sticking to populist agendas. And by charismatic, I mean leaders who are in offices. Obviously, there is some charisma going on, and that is why they are elected. I will move on from these very quickly. So my premise of my research was Republican leaders who have joined the Climate Solutions Caucus, who obviously have knowledge through joining caucus, because they are being informed and educated through the caucus, whether they indulge in gaslighting or not. And my results, and these are all the media channels that they handle themselves, that they control fully, their personal websites, Twitter accounts, and I looked into C-SPAN archives and any interviews that they have given on climate change. So we see a lot of zeros, and the first comments I got was zero will mean no gaslighting, but I would argue that willful silence is communicating something here. Going forward, I created a few codes to look over some of the textual data, and found several of them. This was my hypothesis, whether those Republicans who will have good voting records will gaslight or not. It turned out they indulge in gaslighting pretty often. And my second question was, if they have good environmental record, whether they will gaslight less. Turned out that was incorrect. I did not find a Republican in my sample who was part of the Climate Solutions caucus with a good record. The difference between good and poor was at least a 95% difference. So we talked about inoculation theory. That's what I suggest we do. Thank you. And so just being aware of how information is manipulated, how information is used when we decide to vote, and just being aware of how many different ways we can be manipulated. So, in conclusion, I was going to show a small clip, but we do not have time for that. Thank you very much.
Switch things up, taking my prerogative as chair and switching things up. I'd like to introduce Andrei Miroshenko, and sorry if I butchered that. Andrei, come on down. He's going to be speaking about the political economy of character assassination, how attacks on Trump in the media benefit Trump in the media. That's a question.
Introduce myself, Andrei Miroshenko. Last name that is for an English-speaking person is hard to pronounce, easy to recognize, and impossible to forget. Thank you. Yeah, I need my pictures in order to distract you from my beautiful Oxford accent.
I don't know that, Serge. What did I do?
I see. But it's not for me. Oh, it works.
Whatever you did to make the one come up, just do it again.
What can you do?
How many pages are you going
No?
Like at least one.
What? Oh, nice. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Three more slideshow from the beginning. Okay, I'm going to talk about Donald Trump. So Donald Trump, as the president of the United States, will be gone sooner or later. However, the condition that made Trumpism possible will remain and will impact society. And I just want to remind that Trump was elected in the Obama United States, not in Trump's United States. So the media pay a lot of attention to Donald Trump personally, and each time they publish something, they think they nail Trump. I'm going to prove that negative coverage of Trump benefits both Trump and the media, which is obvious, and explore what mechanisms underlie of such commodification of Trump in the media. Where to refer? Which screen? Where is truth? Where is post-truth? So I wanted the designer who made this audience, so they risked to bring some, I don't know, bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, not to me, I already got it, to the audience. So according to the New York Times, by March 2016, in the beginning of campaign, Trump had already gained media coverage that was the equivalent of about $2 billion in advertisement for free. By comparison, you can see it in heavy. By comparison, Hillary Clinton had earned about $7 146 million in free media at the time, and Bernie Sanders' free media totaled about 300 millions. In February alone, Donald Trump earned 400 million worth of free media just in 1 month. So he saved a lot of money. And you can see some other comparisons, so it's obvious that media covered Trump a lot. Fighting Trump, the mainstream media promoted him. This point was made by comedian Michelle Wolf during the White House correspondent dinner in 2018. She said, he's helped you sell your papers and your papers and your books and your TV. You helped create this monster and now you're profiting of him. This phenomenon is now well known, trying to destroy Trump's reputation as a candidate and then as the president, the media just empowered him. For all people of goodwill, it seems too obvious that the media need just to stop promoting Trump and repeating what Trump said on Twitter. Sociolinguist George Lakoff is one of the advocates of this point of view. He started delivering these proclamations in 2016 and has been continuing calling journalists not to empower Trump by giving him the audience. Do you really think that journalists can stop speaking about Trump? That was interesting to observe how the media managed to cover recent tragic event in New Zealand. So would they be able not to broadcast footage from shooting, right? I don't see monitoring of these. I believe generally the media managed to not to do that, but they solved this event in other way without showing footage. The media benefited from Trump, and those benefits have a solid economic manifestation called Trump bump. Raise your hand, please, who have heard this term, Trump bump. Okay, Trump bump. Yeah, the Trump bump is the surge of subscriptions and TV ratings in the media after Trump's election victory. Actually, many markets had that Trump bump, like stock markets and some other markets, they had Trump bump, and media as well. So the real symbol of the Trump bump is, of course, the New York Times. The Grey Lady made unprecedented progress during the first year of Trump's presidency, adding almost 1 million digital subscribers. Now they have almost 3 million digital subscribers. Here you see the timeline and subscription growth in the New York Times. So it's obviously some huge increase during election campaign and in first time after Trump's inauguration. The Washington Post doubled its subscription in first half a year after Trump's inauguration and reached 1 million digital subscription. By the way, New York Times set the world record for the newspapers, and Washington Post goes on the second, third place in this race. In July 2018, at the Media Congress in Portugal, Vice President of Washington Post, Mickey King, presented a report about their marketing efforts, and she tried to show how their marketing strategy boosted their subscription, and she related some marketing efforts to the chart of subscription growth. I put some other data on the same chart that shows that some other correlations happened. Actually, the election campaign, Trump's victory, small bump, and Trump's presidency, huge bump, huge increase. So we can see that it were not marketing efforts that boosted subscription in this newspaper. It was some events related to Trump. And in fact, there were not correlations, there were probably causations. There have been a lot of other evidences of how media have flourished because of Trump and how much they have become dependent on him. As I said, the New York Times, Atlantic, Washington Post, and some others, not all of them, but mainly coastal and biggest mainstream media, so they doubled and tripled their subscription. For CNN, 2016 was the most profitable year in the organization's history. Shows and TV hosts that focused heavily on Trump received rating boost, like Trevor Noah, Rachel Maddow, and others. Saturday Night Live with Alec Baldwin as Trump increased the viewership 44% this season. For political reporters, White House conferences became kind of booster for their career. Columbia Journalist Review reported very interesting detail that placing international stories in American outlets is getting harder unless international stories directly involve Trump. So reporting from somewhere out abroad, you need to report about Trump in order to be published. The same goes for book publishing. In 2018, each book at the top New York Times bestsellers list had one thing in common: President Trump. And probably, was this word Trump or not? And probably you know this famous or notorious quotation from Les Moonves, the chairman of CBC, who sat in, well, it was itself February 29, so it was in the beginning of the election campaign, yes, right. So it may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. The money rolling in, this is fun. Both Trump and the media commodified Trump's reputation, but if Trump commodifies successfully the greatness of his character, the media commodified the public's fear of Trump. And they did it deliberately, rationally. Those who observed the marketing efforts of mainstream media would notice that they used Trump to boost subscription. So you can see the image of Trump in the banners, marketing banners of the New York Times. Washington Post started used again the motto, "Democracy dies in darkness," on the black background. Other outlets use Trump as well, so here is small scratches here. We've been holding Trump to account all year. Help us keep going, become a member. So it's not the selling of information as a commodity, and fear of Trump became commodity. And this fear brings polarization because, of course, the audience who were immersed into this atmosphere of fear was encapsulated and polarized regarding to the other side of the spectrum. In fact, as Martin said, real news is a bad news. Bad news about somebody or bad news for somebody. You know that media always were blamed for being full of doom and gloom. And the reporter said that if it bleeds, it leads. Now, if it's Trump, it leads. I want to refer to Kahneman and Tversky theory, so-called prospect theory. So they published their work in 1979. So it is the study in cognitive psychology and behavioral economics. So they posit that when making risk-related decisions, people irrationally weigh the probability of potential losses and potential gains, and the emotional impact of potential gains always overweight the risk of potential losses, overweight risk of potential gains. Put it simply, it is better not to lose $5 than to find $5. So the negative consequences of today's situation will impact us much more than positive. So we are oriented on the negative consequences. That is why people are more sensitive to the negative information. That is why when I go Amazon, I read first the response and review is 1 star and 2 star negative review. Negative review is more informative for me to make my informative decision about what to buy, what not to buy. So people incline to react more emotionally on negative information. If we apply this behavioral theory to Donald Trump, we can see that watchdog journalism that is aimed to watch institutions and persons who were going to violate the principles of democracy profited exactly on these fears. What happened now, so in case of Trump, his personal inclination to commodify his personality heavily coincided with the profitability of doom and gloom in the media. which is kind of inherited to the media, and polarized effect of negativity bias of watchdog journalism. So it is impossible not to scare people with Trump for media. So it is impossible to follow the advice of George Lakoff to stop proliferating Trump tweets and so on, because this is the commodity that media is selling now, the fear of Trump. So that is why Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. And as I was trained as a journalist, I sell negativity bias myself. This is my book. I have some to spare if you want. So next I wanted to explore how and why Donald Trump was one of the greatest postmodernists of our era. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then last but not least, we have Josh Compton and Michael Parsons of Dartmouth College doing image attacks, image repair, and rhetorical pivots. Trump's image repair effort after attacks for mocking of journalist disability. Thank you.
Hello, as Emily said, I'm Josh Compton. I'm from Dartmouth College, and my co-author is Michael Parsons. Michael Parsons is unable to be with us today. He's one of my students, and I'm pleased to be able to co-present with him. Although he's not here, we have developed a way for him to do much of the talking in this presentation through a series of brief video excerpts. So I'm going to allow him to do, in fact, most of the talking, and then I'll be available to answer some questions that you might have. This has been really fun for me. Number one, to be working with one of my students, but also I spend most of my time looking at inoculation theory, which is a preemptive process. With Michael's project, we're able to step back and look at a different time of the chronology, not before an image attack, but after it. What can we do after the fact to try to repair, and what are the implications of those rhetorical decisions? So without further ado, here's Michael.
Hi, my name is Michael Parsons. I'm an undergraduate student at Dartmouth College with a major focused in persuasion and public dialogue. Throughout the 2016 presidential race and during the current administration, President and candidate Donald Trump has consistently lashed out with inflammatory and divisive statements. One of his most targeted groups is the media and its members. Often dubbed liberal media or fake news, journalists and news companies grew accustomed to attacks during the campaign from then-candidate Trump. In this particular instance, he attacked a journalist named Sergei at a rally in November of 2015. Sergei and other members of the media had pressed Trump on earlier comments that proved to be untrue. Now, before I go into what the attack was and the image repair tactics that Trump employed, it is important to go through a couple things. First, Mr. Kovalevsky, an investigative New York Times reporter, has arthrogryposis, a condition which impairs the movement of joints. The condition is particularly noticeable in Kovalevsky's right arm. This is important to keep in mind once we come to the actual incident. Next, Trump had already established a contentious relationship with the press at this point in the campaign. Through his rhetoric and his actions, Trump set up this context in which it was Trump versus everyone else. Trump versus the establishment, Trump versus the swamp, Trump versus the media. And this understanding that everything he says or anything that is said about him passes through this frame of reference is paramount as we look at his image repair efforts. And third, we need to understand what is a pivot. We are defining pivot as a rhetorical device used by a speaker to shift from an undesirable, unfamiliar, peripheral topic desirable, familiar, or central topic, while still appearing to address the initial subject matter.
Apologies for the visual effect there. It didn't look like that on our screen, so it kind of looks like you're in the matrix a bit. Are you okay, buddy? We'll do some image repair up there as well. You okay, buddy? You will be. Sorry about that. What could...
This is good.
What could go wrong, Serge, right? If I bring my 5-year-old. So,
That's what makes us a community and a real solid family.
So as Michael pointed out, we're going to be looking at two different players then in this rhetorical event. Whoops, we're not going to hear that again, Michael. President Trump and Sergei Kovaleski. Those are the two players then that we'll be discussing. And the main rhetorical model that we'll be looking at is Benoit's image repair typology. You heard a little bit about that from Dean earlier. William Benoit's typology was first introduced in the 1990s as a way to conceptualize centuries of work in repairing image after it's been damaged. He came out with a second edition in 2014 where he updated some of the examples for the typology, and yet the theory, for the most part, remains consistent throughout the last few decades. A little piece of trivia, today's Bill Benoit's birthday as well. So if you're watching Bill, happy birthday. The typology consists of 5 main categories: denial, evading responsibility, one moment Henry, reducing offensiveness, corrective action, mortification. Denial has some tactics to it. We can engage in what's called simple denial, which simply says, I didn't do what you've accused me of doing. Or you can shift the blame and say, I didn't do it, but I'll tell you who did. We can evade responsibility through 5 tactics. Provocation, I did it, but they made me do it. Diffusability, I did it, but I didn't know better. I didn't have the resources to make a better decision in this situation. Accident, I did it, but it was an accident. I didn't mean to. Good intentions, I did it, but I actually meant well. I thought what I did was going to lead to more good than it did harm. Reducing offensiveness also has different tactics. Bolstering, I did it, but look at all the great things I've also done. Minimization, I did it, but it's really not that big of a deal. Reducing offensiveness, I did it, but it's not as bad as that, right? Transcendence, I did it, but in the context of higher ideals, it's not that big of a problem. Attacking the accuser, I did it, but look what the person who's telling you I did it has also done. And compensation, I did it, here's a gift. Corrective action is exactly what that sounds like. I did it, but I'm gonna fix it. Or I did it, I can't fix it, but I'm gonna make sure that I take some action so that it doesn't happen again. And mortification is saying that you're sorry. I'm gonna let Michael tell you what happened with President Trump's rhetoric. It might be better, since the visual artifact's so strange, it might be better to look away and just listen. We'll never tell Michael.
Now for the incident itself. After a string of bombings in Paris, challenged strongly by many in politics and many in the media, including Kovalevsky, who correctly pointed out that there were no credible sources backing his claim. However, Trump pointed to a single line in an article from 2001 that said that NYPD had allegedly interviewed people that had been reported to be having a rooftop tailgate on September 11th. The reporter who wrote this line was, of course, Sergei. After facing public backlash for the comment, Trump went after Kovalevsky personally. He mocked Kovalevsky's appearance at a rally by doing an impression of him, pointedly flopping his right arm around with his hand held at an odd angle while crudely imitating dialogue portraying Kovalevsky as ignorant. The image was widely circulated, and the media firestorm surrounding the incident was intense, as this was perceived by many as one of the more egregious offenses that Trump had committed during the campaign to this point. In an effort to combat negative coverage, Trump released this statement. I have no idea who this reporter, Sergei Kovalevsky, is, what he looks like, or his level of intelligence. I don't know if he is J.J. Watt or Muhammad Ali in his prime, or somebody of less athletic and physical ability. Despite having one of the all-time great memories, I certainly do not remember him. I merely mimicked what I thought would be a flustered reporter trying to get out of a statement he made long ago. If Mr. Kovalevsky is handicapped, I would not know because I do not know what he looks like. If I did know, I would definitely not say anything about his appearance.
So Michael then has set the stage for the attack and for the response by President Trump after that attack. As Michael mentioned, this attack got a lot of play in the media. It also got a lot of play in political advertising too. This is one ad that was released by a political action committee supporting candidate Clinton at the time. Grace.
When I saw Donald Trump mock a disabled person, I was just shocked.
You gotta see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. Oh, I don't remember.
That reporter he is talking about suffers from a chronic condition that impairs movement of his arms.
It was also used by some of President Trump's challengers too in the primary. Boy, everything's going my way.
Click on the left.
Left
Bottom.
This one down here?
No, this is
The other end.
screen. Opposite
Triangle.
side. Opposite side. Bottom. Drag.
Bottom left.
I want to get out of this one. Great. Just trust me, it was also used by someone else in a political attack. Let me go, and it was effective. In fact, even a couple of years after this incident, when people were polled as to Trump's greatest offense, mocking this reporter was considered number one. I'm going to let Michael wrap it up.
So let's go through this statement using Benoit's typology. Trump starts out this statement by employing a strategy of evading responsibility and the tactic of defeasibility. I have no idea who this reporter, Sergei Kovalevsky, is, what he looks like, or his level of intelligence. I don't know if he is J.J. Watt or Muhammad Ali in his prime, or somebody of less athletic and physical ability. Then he moves into the strategy of reducing offensiveness and the tactic of bolstering. Despite having one of the all-time great memories, I certainly do not remember him. Next, he uses the tactic of differentiation. I merely mimicked what I thought would be a flustered reporter trying to get out of a statement he made long ago. Additionally, in this part of the statement, there is also a subtext of attacking the accuser. In the following sentence, Trump uses simple denial, not of the incident, but of the motivation behind the incident.
Michael goes on with brilliant analysis to complete. We have the paper available for anyone who would like to take a look. Let me just end by saying that one of Michael's most astute observations in this analysis is Trump's use of the rhetorical pivot to seem to accept responsibility for a charge, but not the charge that was the source of the greatest offense. And we're wondering if maybe there's a way one could inoculate against people using rhetorical pivots. Could you warn about the strategy, not the content of it, but the actual strategy to inoculate, and would that take any sort of impact out of image repair efforts? Would it lead to more critical thinking, something that we look at when it comes to inoculation theory? Thank you for your understanding, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, we're gonna spend some time doing some questions, kind of group them all together. So if you do have a question, and you have more than one, please just get them all out right away. I'm gonna start using my prerogative as chair once again to ask questions from each of the panelists. First for John and Serge, regarding climate assassination, I was wondering to what extent you look at the parallels and also the dual use of the energy industry of employing climate change scientists for anti-science reporting, and to what extent does your model also apply to that? For Dean, I want to ask about, for the reputational crossfire and Antifa, congratulations, a lot of that, the narratives that you employed in your crisis communications are incredibly effective. They actually made it into intelligence assessments and analysis by the Fusion Center for our national and statewide police agencies, which now has adopted the Antifa versus the anti-Antifa rhetoric. So to what extent does, when does the line between free speech and free-going physical assault, where does that line lay? Where is that line, morally, ethically, in terms of how to respond to these crises, which are incredibly complex and have way more to do with inner politics and structural problems than it really does to do with free speech, one can argue. So that's one question for you. For Farah, I'm wondering, in terms of the gaslighting, I thought it was really fascinating that there's a climate science caucus, and I think that's really fascinating. And if there's parallels to that you found in history in terms of the National Socialist Party. And then finally, Andre, Dr. Mir, I'm just going to say that, in the economy of character assassination, I wonder to what extent is these economic systems also reflected in what Yoki Benkler and others have called network propaganda, if you've looked at that. So those are just my questions. I'd love for you guys to respond as fast as you possibly can. Does anyone want to respond to that?
Quick response about scientists with the fossil fuel industry. The irony there is that the scientists working for the fossil fuel industry were some of the first scientists who identified the role of fossil fuel burning and causing climate change back as early as the 1950s. But then what the fossil fuel industry did was ignore that science and go on to misinform the public. So it very much parallels what the tobacco industry did with their internal scientists knowing the impacts of their product and then misinforming the public. So if anything, I think that telling that story, which I guess could be classified as character assassination of the fossil fuel industry, is one of the important narratives that need to be told.
It's actually really simple. We're about free speech. We draw the line, and civil discourse is the only acceptable way of working out societal issues. Violence is not tolerated. I mean, that was the clear message we sent. If you want, we actually had a free speech zone. You want to protest, and you want to hold signs, you can. That's a First Amendment right as well. But yeah, there's no slippery slope. Violence is not acceptable. And so that I don't care what side, whatever, violence is not acceptable. So, you know, just to be clear on that. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Full clarification. I hope that rings true with doxing though, because I've been the victim of that, and it does seem to plead in. Is Vera here? She's gone. Is there anyone else who wants to ask questions or respond?
Same time. Mine's for Josh. And have you begun to talk with people who are actually exposed to these messages to see what they see in terms of dealing? Because one of the problems with typologies like Benoit's is it's very complex. And I'm always concerned that the theories we construct have to reflect the capabilities of humans. And your ability to make judgments beyond about 7 categories becomes highly unreliable.
That's a great question. I haven't done empirical work in this area. All of my empirical work is with inoculation theory, but others have, and that's been a recent development to Benoit's typology. In fact, there's a 2015 collection of quantitative analyses of image repair that specifically looks at a systematized way of codifying the DS strategies, and then looks at experimental effects of those strategies on random sample of different populations. And so there has been work here that has largely supported what Benoit has been hypothesizing. It's just not my own work that has looked at that. What I like about the typology is it doesn't assume that the rhetor knows what he or she is doing, right? I mean, it really is receiver focused. So the rhetor doesn't need to be able to identify, I was doing this, this, and this. It's the perception of the receiver that's doing the defining.
And it's Mir, where's Mir?
So I think that Donald Trump is not a disease. He's rather an immune response to disease or immune response to the environmental allergy. So certainly that media environment now is shaped by 3 entities. First is the legacy media or firstborn media, which is the mass media, and led by the human editor, a person with his or her biases. The second entity is that I call the viral editor, so the collective entity of blogosphere and social media, and the third entity is algorithms that will shape our agenda next. So we have 3 sources of agenda shaping: elites, media elites, peoples, and unhuman part of the net algorithms. Now the huge fight for the next election campaign here and in Canada and many countries will be the algorithms, the attempts to regulate algorithms, to make them shaping the same agenda that the mass media used to do. I think that it could be the decision that will postpone the allergic reaction to the change in the media environment. So it could be successful, but it will be just delay in some crucial events. So I think that the best solution or the best reaction to this change in the media environment will be the growth of immunity, but not regulation, because regulation just will put it just inside.
Let's give a round of applause.
All right, wonderful. So please stay here in this room if you are for character assassination, political communication, and cross-cultural character assassination dynamics within the neighboring world.
I'm with the you retire, right? Oh. I'm
from your government 322 class. So I stayed for 2 years. Do I need to stay for I just
It's interesting, Bush is stay, but if something really urgent happens, it will be quite interesting. I don't know, but it's just people stay. did it do something?
All right, now it's time for character assassination in political communication. We're staying right here. Cross-cultural stuff is in the neighboring room. I did. All right. Welcome back. My name is Sergei Samoilenko. I'm replacing Rod, who could not join us for this conference. So our first presenter is Martina Klicperova-Baker and the team, and Josef, Vaclav, and Daniel from, you changed the name, right? So I don't want to butcher your, the name of your new organization, so I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. Thank you for being here, too. My name is Martina Klicperova-Baker. I'm from Czech Academy of Sciences, and this is Josef Hejny from Institute H21. We are both from Prague, Czech Republic. Our presentation will have three parts: othering in social sciences, then a little information about our survey, and attempts at generalizations. Othering and theming is pretty much studied by several sciences, mostly social sciences. Evolutionary biology informs us that primates living in groups are wired for recognition of us versus them polarity. Cognitive psychology uses categorization as a basic cognitive process. Social psychology teaches us about social identity theory. It gave us also self-categorization theory. Neuropsychologists using functional magnetic resonance imaging show that conservatives and liberals have different patterns of fear. Conservatives are afraid of immediate social threats, not of environment threat, and vice versa. So it shows that liberals and conservatives not only look differently and speak differently, but they are wired differently. Developmental psychologists are showing that half-year-old infants already show racial bias favoring their own race. Political psychologists prove how effective negative campaigns are. And sociologists are focusing on collective representations and stereotypes, which is pretty much a subject matter of our little survey.
So we did a little internet survey to gather our friends' opinions on polarization in their country and the character assassination. First, we were trying to do it via email, but the answer rate was not very high. And so we used social media, mainly Facebook, and that proved to be quite good. In 3 weeks, we collected over 45 views from respondents from over 25 countries. And the survey is still going on, so if you wish to add a view from your country, you're still welcome. And so we chose a few examples from this survey for this presentation. First one is from UK. You can see two guys wearing a t-shirt with Ramones and Brexit. And we have a view from John living in Bristol, which I will read to you. He wrote us. In my opinion, there's nothing new going on. It's the same old anti-immigrant and xenophobia that's plagued the human race since the beginning. It's not surprising that the areas that have the least amount of migrants are actually the ones that are scared of immigration the most. The fear of those others who you've never met is a powerful one. The current populist parties are just using an old formula to gain power, and sadly it's working. I don't know in the Czech Republic, but in the UK it's not only about rural villages and towns, but age. The older, the more likely they follow populist. My age upwards, he is 45. I only mention immigration because for me, that's what it's all really about. In the UK, it's pretty much the same as the US. They use terms like snowflake, lip-turds, that's a blend of two words, liberal and retard, and he continues like inbred village people, etc. With Brexit, it's Ramona's blend of Remain and Moaners versus Brexiters. It's funny really, it's like children. I blame social media. Crooks know how to manipulate people's fears on both sides and have been doing so for the last few years. So we have also examples from some other countries. For example, in Italy there are two biggest terms, terrone and polentone, that northern people, northern south, yes, that northern use terrone for southerns because terra is a ground in Italy, so it means like farmers essentially. And southerns use polentone for the northern people. Polentone means the people who eats only polenta. It's a traditional meal. New Zealand. You see a guy wearing a t-shirt saying 100% Jaffa, which Patrick from New Zealand told us about this. Aucklanders look down on the South Island, especially people other than Christchurch, because of their location. Aucklanders have a perspective of being superior because they are from the big smoke, as we call it. Aucklanders definitely think South Islanders are anyone else not from Auckland are inbred hillbillies. When in comparison, we look at them as stuck-up rude bastards. Jaffa is a nickname commonly called to someone outside of Auckland. It means just another freaking Aucklander. Yes. Because they are all the same. They come down to the South Island, complain about the cold, say everything is miserable and expensive, don't give any money back to the local economy, wear those stupid puffer jackets, litter everywhere, and be overly melodramatic about stupid little things that don't really matter, like complaining there is only 6 available selections of wine. Gore, a town, became the butt of every joke in New Zealand because of all these rumors coming out of the town. Everyone is worst hillbilly you could imagine. It's like, yes, I'm from the West Coast, but at least I'm not from Gore. Yes, we have, maybe I'll be a little bit faster. Well, in Poland, that's actually funny because the ruling party is called Prawo and Sprawiedlność. And you can see even in English that the PiS kind of is a negative connotation. So when people are preparing banners in English for the demonstration, they put their PiS off signs, basically. And yeah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just a little remark about Poland. Although this party has an emblem, the Polish eagle, the critiques of the party are actually using another bird. Kaczynski means duck. The person, the president Kaczynski means duck. So, and because they are right wing, so they are making these swastikas from duck feet.
Yes. And these are a few examples from US. We were being sent. There is, for example, for the liberals, there's this just remember meme. Just remember, inside every Prius you pass is a sad liberal. And so on. Okay. So that's, I will pass the word to Martina.
So, can we generalize anything from the spectrum of those insults and polarizations? We observed a lot of great variety of insults, ridicules, name-calling, insults of intellect and character, which are based on current policies, ethnic splits, political left and right, rich and poor, identity politics, old versus new, settlers, immigrants, natives, tourists, globalists, villages and towns, coast, inland, north, south, west, east, old versus new generation. Basically, it boils down to several major splits: biology, economy, ethnicity and territory, culture, and intellectual inequality, and these overlap. So we showed you some extreme polarization terms and character insults, but if you look at the literature is actually suggesting that polarization is a basic cognitive tool, and if not entirely exclusive and pernicious and destructive, it is not necessarily bad. So it can play a constructive role in formation of party systems. It can have even the certain moral polarization between liberals and conservatives. When it is moderate, it can be useful for democratic societies. And if you are familiar with Jonathan Haidt, the moral psychologist, you know what I'm talking about. And actually, even in a Czech survey, we found liberals and conservatives as somewhat complementary in their morality, not necessarily fighting it out. So there are two problems with polarization. The danger lies in societal asymmetry, if there is a majority and minority that is oppressed. And the second big problem with polarization is if it reaches aggressive, pernicious discourse, if it delegitimizes the opponents, if it completely separates them physically, both physically and psychologically. And the extreme polarization example of it is dehumanization, pseudo-speciation. That means the other is not just another person, another tribe, but another species, a vermin, a pest. You may have noticed the Republicans refer to the Democrats or to the Democratic Party as Democrat Party. Have you noticed that linguistic pun? Democrat Party. And actually, in George Bush, when he was going against Gore, they were using those rats as subliminal signal.
The government plan to let Washington bureaucrats interfere with what their doctors prescribe. The Gore prescription plan, bureaucrats decide.
Did you see those rats there, right? Another pretty brutal example of dehumanization is Murdoch's New York Post showed Obama not only as another species, but also being exterminated. And that was not a campaign, that was already his presidential term. So how to reduce such antagonism? Embracing the insults, maybe that would be a way how to constructively come to some kind of a compromise. If you like art, you may know that Impressionists, Cubists, Fauvists, these were originally insults. And they were embraced, and now they are a badge of honor. In a similar way, you can see MAGA people with the MAGA Trump's hat, wearing a t-shirt, I'm a deplorable, kind of accepting in a funny way.
Because our president, he said Prague Cafe in a very negative manner, that we are intellectual Prague Cafe.
Intellectual insults, right.
And we have to say we are
and
part of it.
Now we have several Prague cafes that open.
Yeah.
Embrace taking an insult as a badge of honor. This fag bag actually originated originally as a vandalized car of a gay student, and he had it repainted. He accepted it, and he toured the United States. Another possibility: logical arguments. This is interestingly broken. So the teaching of Jesus is about love people and feed them all and be nice to them. But the question is a conservative worshipper really accepting the teaching of Jesus as Jesus supposedly claimed these positive words? Well, logic may not work if you know the word. 2 minutes? If you know the word by Glaser, Jost, and Kruglansky, political conservatism as motivated social cognition, it works both ways for conservatives and liberals too, but it's more pronounced, I'm afraid, in conservatives. Terror management, it's much stronger motive than social learning. So logic may not really work in this. Civility. Civility is, I believe, absolute precondition for democracy. Civility can be a cure against polarization. But, and have a look at John McCain as he's fighting bigotry. I'm afraid of Obama, he says.
Domestic terrorists such as yours, I have to tell you,
maybe it's domestic terrorists. You do not have to be scared of Obama. And do you hear the audience protesting?
I gotta ask you a question. I do not believe it. I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's a terrorist.
He's an Arab. I cannot trust Obama. And again, heroic moment from John McCain.
He's a decent, manly man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
Yeah. So civility against polarization. However, even civility is getting ridiculed. There are character insults ridiculing goodness and civility. In Czech Republic, we have truth lover insult, some person insult, willcomer insult, havloid insult, goodness shitter insult. In Germany, it's good mensch, or in Italy, buonista. So maybe there is still some other way, improving the democratic process by giving people opportunity to vote consensually. And I hope you have participated in this attempt to improve democracy and Janecek voting method. And just a very conclusion, certain level of polarization, ideological distance may be useful. Democracy can be constructively agonistic and pluralistic. However, polarization which splits people physically and psychologically is destructive for democracy. One proven method of fighting this polarization is civility. And another method which we are promoting here is Janecek's voting method, T21. Janecek is here, and he will have a presentation over the next one about the very method. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for you participated in this. You will actually hear about the results of that poll. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Ekaterina Egorova from Political Profiler.
Hello everybody, I'm Ekaterina Egorova. I'm a political psychologist and political consultant. As political consultant, I have a great experience in character assassination from both sides. Today we will talk about character assassination as revenge in international relations. Reputation plays a dramatic role in international relations because states' leaders' reputation is an important tool for other states to forecast and to assess the prospect of interaction. Politicians and their decisions are perceived through a prism of their reputation. Character assassination in international relations often occurs as revenge for the action of state offender, which is perceived by state victim as humiliation. Humiliation lowers the victim's status, damages its reputation and self-esteem, and does it publicly. State victim feels humiliation, frustration, and desire for revenge. Decision to pay back transforms state victim into state avenger, who starts character assassination as retaliation. Avenger has different goals in character assassination of offender. First type of goal is to destroy the offender's reputation for resolve, reputation for military alliance, and reputation for cooperation in different spheres with other states. Other type of goal is to convince the Avenger's allies and the international audience in the authenticity of offender's transgression and legitimacy of offender's response. November 24, 2015, a Turkish Air Force F-16 fighter jet shot down Russian bomber near Syrian-Turkish border. Immediately, Russia started extremely tough, intensive, and short character assassination campaign of Turkish President Erdogan. Putin became furious, usually cold-blooded, but now furious. He called the incident a stab in the back by the terrorist accomplice. I should say that 9 days before, Putin participated in G20 summit in Antalya, and in press conference he said that President of Turkey is a straightforward and open person with whom it's possible to find common ground for settling crisis in Syria. Russia in this character assassination campaign had different goals. Concerning President Erdogan, the goals were to destroy Erdogan's reputation as political leader and his reputation for cooperation with other states. Concerning NATO and anti-ISIS coalition, goals were to destroy Erdogan's reputation for alliance in anti-ISIS coalition and to show NATO that NATO is not united because their own member betrays NATO. Of course, Russia had self-interest in this character assassination campaign. They were to show Russian reputation for resolve, receive international support, and maintain domestic feeling of the besieged fortress. In this character assassination campaign, victims or better targets were Erdogan and his family, Turkey, Turkish government, and Turkish intelligence service. The mostly interesting was the momentum because it was spontaneous, but information had been stockpiled in advance, just in case. Russia used different methods of character assassination. It was ad hominem, name calling, personal attack, insults, and specific demonizing labels such as accomplice of terrorist, thief, criminal, traitor, hypocrite. Appeal to authority of Western media as well as the US generals. I'll tell about it later. And Russia used huge amount of factual proof. In press conference of Russian Defense Department, it was shown pictures from space intelligence with serious, with ISIS fuel trucks with stolen Syrian oil on the Turkish border and crossing the Turkish border. When Erdogan was attacked as a political leader in Russian campaign, there were used different topics. One of the topics was low morality of Erdogan, who despite terroristic attack in Turkey is an accomplice of terrorists. This expression of Putin very rapidly became a meme in political and public discourse in Russia. Erdogan was also described as a thief who robs neighbors' oil and treasures with the help of intelligence service of Turkey. Erdogan and his family were criticized for criminal business ties with ISIS and especially ISIS commanders because Bilal, Erdogan's son, communicated directly with ISIS commanders. In this picture you can see Bilal with yellow hair and his friends from ISIS commanders with a red hair. Especially is impressive the picture with severed heads. Erdogan's daughter works in Turkish secret hospital for wounded ISIS terrorists. This expression was widely spread in Russian media. Erdogan also was pictured as small-minded and a purblind politician who poorly forecasted Putin's reaction toward the downing of Russian plane. And Putin said that Allah took his mind. Putin used another very negative expression toward Erdogan. You can imagine a tough political leader from Muslim country and who is Muslim himself, who was described as a man who licked Americans in certain place. It's expression of Putin. He meant that he is an ass licker. Erdogan's reputation for cooperation was attacked also using a few topics. One of them was that Erdogan is a traitor who steps in the back and who betrays his long-term partners, friendship, and agreements. That Erdogan is insidious and acts on the sly because Turkish fighter jet waited in ambush for Russian planes prior to the attack. Erdogan also was depicted as unnegotiable and unpredictable. It's impossible to reach a common ground with Erdogan, said Putin. Remember that 10 days before it, he said the absolutely opposite things. Erdogan's reputation for alliance in NATO and anti-ISIS coalition was destroyed using different ideas. First of all, Erdogan was pictured as betrayed NATO and anti-ISIS coalition, who collaborating with their enemies for his own profit. That illegal oil trade is carried out by Turkey to finance the terrorist group. And Turkish money helped ISIS attack Europe and the rest of the world. Also, there were indicated a huge amount of fighters, ammunition, and vehicles who have been delivered to ISIS from Turkish soil. Erdogan supports radical Islam, and he is dangerous. It was stressed in Russian media, inside the Russia and to foreign countries. And using the method of appealing to authority, Russia not only quoted the British newspaper Guardian with many articles where Erdogan was blamed for his cooperation with ISIS, but also United States General Paul Valley, who said, if NATO have any resolve, they would oust Turkey out of NATO because they are not cooperating against ISIS. Russian has self-interest was to enhance a reputation for resolve. Putin said many tough accusations toward Erdogan, and he was main source of information for the media that period, also together with the Ministry of Defense. Putin said, we will never forget Erdogan's collusion with terrorists. I would like Erdogan to remember this. But May 27, 2016 in Athens, Putin mentioned that Russia received signals from Turkey that it would like to improve relations with Russia. And Putin said that it's possible, but only after Erdogan apologizes. 1 month later, June 27, Erdogan sent a letter to Putin offering apologies. June 9, 2016, Erdogan visited Putin and bilateral relations were restored after the waterfall of insults, ad hominem, personal attacks. It was the end of the short, intensive, and tough and strange CA campaign against Erdogan. Thank you for your attention.
All right. Now we have Carol and in association with Petr and Jan, presenting from divisions to consensus, the Janecek voting method, right?
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Karel. I am the founder of the H21 Institute. And I think first introduction, let me make a little thought about our times, what is happening now. You can see that in our world, there are big threats, there are deepening big threats, and we can all see that. You can see the rise of populism, extremism, dangerous democracy, not just in one country, but globally. On the other side, we are lucky because the opportunities are mounting. We have technologies, we have communications, which we do not know how to use, but we have opportunities which are for the future. Now, I think it is a good time. Well, it's a time where this old joke is very well placed. The old joke is, imagine two planets that are flying through the universe, and they meet each other, and one of them asks the other, "How are you doing?" And the second one says, "Not good really. I have Homo sapiens sapiens." And the first one says, "Don't worry, it will be over soon." So, if you know this joke or not, I think it's a good time now to think about it, because it is really the time that we must act now. I and many of us believe that the world is coming to some kind of global change. Either we fail as human civilization because the threats are just too big, so we must do something, and if we don't do anything, then we fail. Or we grasp the opportunities that we have in technologies and other means, and we will make a big change towards much better, towards the world of 21st century, which we call H21, Human 21. I have been trying to act on this since like 9 years. After I was successful in business, and I decided that it's not time to be making more money anymore, but it's time to spend about changes in society and helping. And the first thing that I started was actually the Endowment for Support of Research and Science, and the second one was Endowment Against Corruption in the Czech Republic, which is what I started end of 2010, early 2011. And yes, I have been very subject of character assassination quite intensely, especially in the first years when started anti-corruption endowment. And yes, I believe that corruption is a major problem of today's world as well. However, I realized after some time of existence of the anti-corruption endowment, a very successful work on that the core of the problem of the society lies not directly in corruption, it's a consequence, but lies in the character of people who are in power. The populist extremists dividing society. So those people who are leading us are the problem. And I came to this conclusion because we were in communication with members of parliaments and other politicians as representative of the anti-corruption endowment. And since then I have been thinking how to do it, what needs to change. And I looked into how people who are in power get there, how they are voted, and I found out that actually the voting system, how people are voting, is a weakness, and it is often very illogical, very bad. Specifically in the Czech Republic, the proportional system is a system that promotes corruption. You have a close-end party list, and in order to be elected, you need to kind of bribe the political party to put you there. The situation is a little bit different in the United States or Great Britain, where there is a majority voting system, but these systems are very inefficient as well. So I started to work on that, and I developed a voting system based on vote against. Now we call it downvote, voted against somebody who is, and it would be a good system. That was the start, and a year later, I actually expanded further, and I designed a voting system which we call now D21, and it is the system why I'm here, and while I'm trying to promote and apply it internationally, because I believe, and in fact we do have proofs for that, both testing in the fields and both academic analysis, that this is a system that's a new chapter, the new chapter of human civilization. I dare to say that. How does it work? Let me first make a brief overview of what's going on, how the systems work in our world. So we have the first past the post system. The winner takes all. It is, as you probably know, it's not good, and we can see it, and it needs to change, but just the user side is so complex, it takes a long time. It's a version 1.0. It is democracy, but it's very inefficient. It's a democracy that worked 30, 50, 100 years ago, but not anymore. Then a little bit better version would be like 1.2, which we could have the proportional voting system in the Czech Republic and elsewhere, but it is also not very good from various reasons. Then you can have systems which are more complicated and would be better. An example it would be single national vote or Austrian voting system. If anybody is interested after, I'm happy to talk more details about that, why it is not really so good, given the complication. Then there is this system that I call D1.9, and that's the system against corruption that we vote against. Still, we are in version 1.0, so it's like we are in DOS. Okay, you have version 1 if you want to take it from the programming point of view. And then there is a big change, jump in efficiency and working, and we are getting to version 2.1 or also 21, and it's like upgrade from DOS to Windows. So you make upgrade from DOS to Windows or from DOS to Windows for some people who have the same ID, and we have something that's much more powerful, and I will explain why. So in order to explain that, I will give you this very simple example, and let me say, this simple example is not artificial. That's something that happens, but practice a lot. And in fact, in the game you played, I will give you the results. Probably after the next section, I will just tell you the results. And it's just happening repeatedly. This example is not artificial. So imagine that you have a group of people at an international conference who decide to go for a dinner together, and they are in dispute which restaurant to choose. So they make a vote. Makes sense? So you can see, well, what's the result? Restaurants of different countries, people, they vote for their country, and somehow two people agree on fast food from some reason. So this result of this voting, from if you take it from the global social utility point of view, is probably the worst. We could argue is the worst. And the voting gave that. And this is something that's a feature of the first past the post system, that a group of people that concentrates on one spectrum, being left or right or being some topic, even though it's a small minority, because it's concentrated, it beats the others, which split their votes. Okay. So now, how does it work? What happens if we have the T21 voting system? Meaning there is one winner, one restaurant wins, so we have more votes than the winners. That's the point of the voting system. So now we have 2 votes. So you can see that, for example, Italian restaurants, we can expect that the McDonald's doesn't get any vote, but the second vote, because people find consensus, they give their second choice. What happens that many more people are happy, because those who chose Italian restaurant as their second choice are quite happy as well. So here is the result. On top of that, we can have the minus vote or down vote against, and here you can see that McDonald's from the first place goes to the last place, for example, in this case. So it is a unique method which finds consensus. And how does it find consensus? Let me try to state once more the basic principle of the voting method. The basic principle is that each voter has more votes than the winners. 1 vote per 1 person. So for example, if there is 1 winner, for example, presidential elections, you may have 2 votes. You can vote for 2 people or even 3 votes. Now, of course, you need to understand that with such rules, you will have multiple candidates. It won't be 2 parties again, but you can imagine like a situation in Europe where you have multiple 10, 12 candidates running for the office, and you have 2 or 3 votes. So now what happens is, if there is a person who is not consensual at all, somebody who has only 1 vote and doesn't vote anybody else, this person, this voter, gives one vote to the preference, to the let's say in this case maybe populistic, maybe extremist candidate. On the other side, imagine the voters who are democratic voters, consensual voters, and especially voters who do their homework and they learn something, they learn about candidates, and they have 2 or 3 votes, so they give the 2 or 3 votes to 3 people. So what does it mean is that their voting power is stronger than the one who has only one choice, and on top of that, the candidates who are democratic, they do not compete as much with each other. Let's say, the competition is fair. So we are avoiding the problem of the standard voting system is that the extremist parties or populistic parties have much higher strength than they would actually deserve. So here we are finding consensus, and I will say some more examples towards the end for you to see the effect. So, how this is part of the theorem. We don't have time to go into much detail, but again, I'm very happy to discuss in full details the logic behind. We are applying the system for already several years in many places in the world, not just in the Czech Republic. But you can say, I would point out, for example, participatory budgeting in New York City, where we have done that since the year 2016. We are still doing that, and it's very successful. The point of participatory budgeting is that people, citizens of a city, may decide how part of the budget is being spent. So they do voting, and D21 means that you are voting for more options than the winners, and it has the effect of finding a consensual result. Now, we have done a lot of research, practical research, yes, practical research specifically in the Czech Republic. I will just go quickly through the data here. You can see we have done research in Senate elections. In the Czech Republic, Senate elections are a majority system to run. It's much better than the first past the post system, but still B21 offers a significant improvement compared to the two-run voting system, which is much better than the first past the post. So, here are some data that we have done. Just some results. You can see, well, presidential elections, I will mention a little bit later in next slides. Local elections, out of 13 districts, we have 3 different winners. And not only there are 3 different winners, but the winners are the ones which turn out to be the worst ones. Okay, so in retrospect, those were really the ones, the changes that were desired. And others as well. Here, by the changes, 3 times the polarizing candidates, they would not win the T21. And 2 times there were people who were under investigation of corruption. Unfortunately, many people don't care in the corruption. And with the standard voting system, actually, even though the corrupt candidate, they get this vote. If you have a vote against downvote, or if you have multiple votes, then these people have serious weakness, are even. So now, exit poll for presidential elections in last year, 2018, in the Czech Republic. Here you can see Miloš Zeman, very controversial person, separating the society, the country, pro-China, pro-Russia, big problem for the Czech Republic. He is the Czech president, unfortunately. Here in this poll, you can see that he is a clear winner with just 1 vote. On the other side, as soon as we add D21 with 3 votes plus and 1 vote denied, he is 5th. From the former first place, he goes 5th. So he totally is down. This is the effect of multiple votes and of the vote against. Now, if we just want to look at the effect of multiple votes without counting the vote against, you can see that he would be 2nd, but clearly 2nd. Okay. Effect of downvote. Here you can see why he lost so much. So because he is a controversial, separating society, people against. By the way, this guy, that's a former prime minister a leader of a right-wing party who is, I don't know for sure if he's corrupt, but he's certainly a friend of many corruptors. So this guy ended up in -15 in total. Now, the tools that have been mentioned, I don't have much time, 2 minutes, so please think about social games. We as people, we can engage ourselves over the internet, we can communicate, we can vote. In fact, we have started as an Institute H21, at the time Institute for Democracy 21, in 21st December 21/12 of 2016, we started the social game, the election game that people were voting for Czech president. People could nominate people, there were around 400 nominations. Cutting it short, in the last phase, we were running, the game continued from official candidates. We had 330,000 voters, which was like 7% of all people who voted. The game has been successful. Here you have the results. It's of course similar to what you see on the exit polls, but again, of course these numbers are not representative samples. So here you can see Zeman because it's not representative sample. Zeman was second, okay. But if you take the effect of multiple votes again without the -1, just effect of multiple, it drops to the 5th place. And young guy who was 5th jumps to 2nd place. You see, this guy got more 2nd and 3rd votes than the 1st votes.
And those votes went to this guy, this guy, and the other whole of the spectrum.
But one point, Zeman is a prototypical populist.
Prototypical populist, really. That's typical populist, Zeman. It's not extremist, but typical populist.
So the traditional method elects populists.
So as a final conclusion, E21 gives positive campaigns. Let me just say, what if you are running for president? What will be your optimal strategy? Your optimal strategy will that you will take the other candidates, choose 1 or 2 of them, and support them. You will say, oh, I like my opponent, he's doing these good things, but of course I can do it even better. Why? Well, because you need their supporters as well. You need the 2nd and 3rd votes. Okay, so you cannot just win by fighting against others. No negative campaigning, positive campaigning. So that's a total change in democracy. Engagement of people, of course, because you give them more votes. It's not that the people need to choose lesser evil, they will be more interested. It's again popular against argued. It's a chance for small parties. I don't have time to explain it now, but for voting for parliament, the logic will be that you will have 2 seat voting districts, not only 1 winner per district, but 2 winners per district, and 4 votes plus, 4 upvotes. And then the dynamics is completely different. And even though you are voting, it's semi-proportional system. It's a majority system. You will have small parties, and it is very efficient, very transparent, and very easy. And we have proved that in our tests, in our public tests. And I thank you very much.
All right. And finally, we have Nino Rusidze from Corvinus University of Budapest, Hungary, presidential election and character assassination, case of Georgia.
I have a privilege to close this conference. I promise to be short. So yes, I'm talking about the recent presidential elections in Georgia. In 2018, Georgia chose its 5th president. And the previous 4 presidents of Georgia, all of them were elected in the first round of elections with overwhelming majority. First 3 were executive heads of the government actually making decisions. The 4th one is a semi-parliamentary, but the current president has just a symbolic role in the country. No executive power whatsoever. However, this was the first time in the history of independent Georgia when we had the 2nd round of the elections, because none of the candidates gained 50+1 vote. So what was so interesting about it, and what was happening in these elections, I identified three main aspects. One was the foreign policy, the second one was the presidential pardon, and the moral advantage. It was a very well strategically planned campaign from the both sides, and well-organized opposition actually led to the second round. That was a result of their well-planned strategy. I'm taking the foreign policy because the president does not have a decision-making in the foreign policy, but it does represent the country in the foreign policy negotiations with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And that's why. The second one was a presidential pardon, which remains the only executive tool for the president, and currently there are multiple former high officials imprisoned in Georgia for certain crimes, and the president's political ideology actually means something. And the moral advantage, which since 2012 there is a Georgian Dream coalition ruling in the country, and this right now in the society there is a perception of stagnation. And it's not that something bad is happening, just the development and advancement is not as fast as we would like to, or at least as we expected to. And opposition sensed it, and there was, they tried to grasp the momentum, actually, and to prove and the society at the same time wanted to show the ruling party that, okay, we are dissatisfied and we want some changes. 25 candidates were registered initially, but for the runoffs, Salome Zurabishvili and Grigol-Vashadze were made it. So these are the two candidates. The first was Salome Zurabishvili. She is an independent candidate. It was interesting because the ruling party decided not to nominate any candidate, but support the independent candidate which was running. This was an official narrative for the Georgian Dream coalition, was that it's a president and it has to be the president of the whole country, so let's not have the party affiliation. And the second one is Grigol-Vashadze, which was a candidate for the United National Movement, the former ruling party of Georgia. And for the second round, all the opposition candidates consolidated behind him and endorsed his candidacy. I think to continue further, parts of biography is very important. The independent candidate Salome Zurabishvili was born and raised in Paris, France. She is a granddaughter of political immigrants of Georgia that had to flee the Sovietization of the country because they were one of the founders of the First Republic of Georgia. She was educated in Paris and additionally in Columbia University. She was a diplomat, worked in UN, Washington, Brussels, and for some time she was ambassador to Georgia and Minister of Foreign Affairs in Georgia. Vashadze was born and raised in Soviet Georgia, educated in Soviet Russia. He worked for the Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, and then he went to the private sector after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in the 90s, again in Moscow. Then he came back to Georgia and also was the Foreign Affairs Minister of Georgia for a certain period of time. When we talk about the foreign policy of the country and the foreign policy of the candidates, this is very important for Georgia. So important that in the amendments of the Constitution in 2017, Georgia amended the Constitution and wrote that each and every government has to do everything possible so that country will continue its direction towards the West to become member of the European Union and the NATO. The support of this idea is quite high. 83% of Georgians support EU membership and 78% support NATO membership. If we take the age range, we will have young adults with the highest support rate. These are the 35 years old people. And besides this, if you ask a question, what is the biggest threat for Georgian national security, majority of the people will say Russia. And the threats and the military aggression from Russia. It goes from the Russian military aggression, occupation of the Georgian territories, to the propaganda, to economic dominance, and etc., and etc. So, what has happened and how Salome Zurabishvili ended up to be a Russian candidate? Well, right after she announced her run for presidency, in August, in one of the first interviews, she was still independent candidate, not supported by the Georgian Dream coalition whatsoever. She was asked about the situation of 2008 Georgian-Russian war. And that's what she said, and I'm gonna quote. Georgia began this phase of military conflict. This is known to all, and this is the official version for everyone. It's even confirmed by the European Union, end of the quote. And this caused a really, really, really big disagreement and conflict within the society, within her supporters, within the supporters of Georgian Dream. It was so big that Georgian Dream even postponed their endorsement of Zurabishvili for a couple of weeks. They were thinking about it. And she had to go in a defensive strategy and explain over and over again what she meant in what she said. And she explained herself that, yes, of course, Russia is an aggression and the aggressor, and they started aggression 100 years ago, but this was a provocation, and Saakashvili, who was in 2008 the president of Georgia, went along this provocation. And the land that Georgian army bombed is actually de jure Georgian land, and these people de jure are Georgians. So that was a problem, and in case I'm a president, I want to do this. But people did not really buy this. And this was the result of it. There was a petition for her to actually leave the campaign at all. And at the same time, it is very interesting that there was done a social media analysis by the International Society for Fair Elections and Democracy. In the first round, 26 Facebook pages were running to destroy her, for her character assassination attempt. It was organized movement. You could see that the content were the same. Really? Wow, okay. It increased to 43 for the second round, and the main ideas were that she was pro-Russian. And they used videos of the Orthodox bishops saying that voting for her would have been a treatment, and besides this, the military, former military officials, that it was a treason to even to have her as a candidate. And additionally, there was attacks to her personality, to her children, because her first husband was also a Georgian immigrant, but to Iran, and this was very symbolic parts about her family. She was mocked for her not fluent Georgian, because her native is actually French, and etc. and etc. Then Grigol Vashadze, and then again, he's also a candidate of Putin, he's also a candidate of Russia, he's a KGB agent. A lot of fake news occurred concerning him, like, for example, his KGB agency passport or something like that. His videos emerged when he was talking that he is a man of the Russian culture, and he was targeted by for his wife, who is a ballerina in Moscow Bolshoi Theater, and because of her dances there. Actually, Salome Zurabishvili's strategy to portray Vashadze as pro-Russian failed, and opposition managed to frame her as more pro-Russian, and the second round approach. In the second round, what the Georgian Dream Coalition did was that they hired a strategist from Israel, Moshe Klukov, and he did a miracle that actually helped them. This was after the second, when the second round started, this kind of posters appeared. This was like a principal choice, and there is no vote for Salome Zurabishvili, but she's not here. These are the leaders of the Georgian Dream Coalition. On the posters, it was highly mocked in the media. It was not much of a good decision, I think. This was which worked. It was like what I ordered and what I received. It was, if you vote for Vashadze, and behind there were the pictures of the former officials that currently are in prison, or the picture of Saakashvili. So they kind of tried to delay Vashadze as a candidate at all, and put that, okay, with him you are electing the past, the criminals. No to Nazis, not to the evil. This is what's the picture. And it was all over the social media. The pages that were targeting for the CA of Vashadze tripled for the second round, from 27 to 72, and it was very well organized. What actually these both parties were doing is not to catch the voters from each other, because no, it's not happening. It was just to motivate some people not to go to elections. This is a turnout of the first round. and this was achievement of the opposition. They, for the moderate voters or the undecided voters, they made it so messed up and so ugly that some of them preferred to stay at home rather than go to elections. On the second round, what Georgian Dream did, that they made it so ugly for Rusidze, they made him so dangerous that the other opposition voters did not go to elections, but moderates or undecided went to the elections and actually voted. For the second round, approximately 60% voted for Salome Zurabishvili, and Georgia elected the first elect female president of the country. She's still controversial. She still has a very bad image and reputation, but she's the president. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Nino. Now we have time for Q&A. So, Jennifer?
I have a question for Nino, actually. So, you can say.
Yes,
I'm curious about the attacks on the female candidates, especially since you said that she's the first female president. Was there a sense, because obviously here in the U.S., attacking Hillary Clinton basically because she was a woman is a big thing. Did she get attacked because she was a woman?
Not really. That was very good thing, because no, she nor the Georgian Dream tried to push her gender card, no, and also she was not attacked because she was female. But I'm going to tell you what was happening. For example, there were fake accounts that were trying to play as a supportive of opposition UNM, and these fake fake Facebook pages were saying that women cannot be the head of the state, women cannot be head of the military, but these were the fake profiles actually, which were trying to cause the bigger aggression for the opposition.
Eric? Question to Karel. Well, numerous research, well, several studies show that when several candidates run and they're close ideologically, like a US primaries, for example, Republicans, Democrats, it is number one, attack closest person to you ideologically. For example, because we're close, but we're running and decide just to attack my colleague because viciously attack them. If people have, say, 2 votes, still, why do you have to say nice things about him? I want to win. And I would just eliminate him completely,
okay.
And vice versa, vice versa.
So here, we assume that as a candidate you want to maximize your probability of winning. So now, if you have somebody who is taking your voters, who has similar program, then yes, it is logical to attack the close opponents. But now, assume that people have 3 voters, and there is candidates which are several candidates which are closer to each other. So why would you attack anybody? You want to fight for the additional vote because every voter has 4 votes. So you want to fight for the second and third votes of the other people rather than attacking somebody and making pissed off, upset the people who are the supporters of your opponent, right? So if you attack your opponent, which is close to you, you are actually doing really, really bad because you are pushing off his voters who will not give you the second or third vote. So what you want to do, you want to motivate the voters of your close opponent so that they give you the second or third vote. So in fact, you want to support him. You want to say I like him, so that you attract his voters. But of course, you want to say that you do things even better, right? So the dynamics, the strategy is completely different. It exactly flips off from negative campaigning to positive.
I've got a question.
On the Turkish-Russian character assassination. I was wondering if you could look on the Turkish side, the way Turkey reacted to this character assassination that was really directly, as you said, targeting Erdogan as a personality, and if there were criticism on the Turkish side by the fact that Erdogan kind of accepted to be humiliated by Putin and
from my Turkish colleagues, I know that it were two different trends in reacting to Putin's character assassination of Erdogan. The first trend was from opposition, who pressed on Erdogan to improve relations with Russia because Turkish-Russian economic relations are important to Turkish economy, and ignoring Turkish resorts by Russian tourists for vacation and economic sanctions, they were extremely effective. That's why opposition criticized Erdogan. And people from Erdogan's side, of course, were much more tough in their reaction, and they insisted to the blame of Putin as a revenge. So two different and oppositional trends.
I'd like to ask Karel another question. So some of you might know the Eurovision Song Contest, and we have a strategic voting during the song contest. Do you have similar effects? It means that you are giving votes to neighborhood countries due to strategic considerations?
Yeah, this strategic voting is a very evolved topic. Yeah, unfortunately there is no time here, but I can tell you I understand that it may be sounding too good to be true, because I can say that D21 is taking advantages of maturity and proportional voting system by dropping out disadvantages, and there is very hardly you can find strategic voting there. You could find theoretically some strategic voting if there is the vote against, but the downvote is not the important it's not that important feature. It was there because of the voting, but the most important feature is the effect on multiple votes. And you can hardly try to find strategic voting there. The point is, because you have so many votes, you have more votes than the winners, then it's really not doable. Yeah, of course, you can construct a theoretical example, but it's not practical at all. So we can say that no strategic voting, that's yet another advantage.
About the voting again, I want to commend you. You're subject to a lot of character assassination for trying to actually do something. So you put yourself in a difficult situation.
For this, I don't get that much character.
That's true.
But always corruption.
Always the critic has much to say for someone who's trying to do something. So one thing I noticed, is there any tendency for this kind of, especially voting against system, to have a anti-incumbency effect? Because you mentioned both of the people who were formerly in office. You mentioned they might be corrupt, but it could also be they simply had served in office, generating a lot of opposition. So you can imagine being an incumbent, you actually have to lead. You have to, as a leader, you have to upset people. So that could be one thing. And the other one is this. I assume that you put it through the standard. This goes back to the French Revolution and voting systems, this notion of Condorcet winner and this mathematical system. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, so there are different characteristics like Condorcet and stuff like that. Again, it's for deeper discussion, but just to say briefly, the point is not that theoretically the system should satisfy Condorcet. In fact, practically no voting system satisfies Condorcet winner or loser. Yeah? But here with D21, in order to construct an example where you do not satisfy Condorcet winner, it's quite difficult. Yeah? So you most of the cases you satisfy, and in fact, not only that, even there are situations where Condorcet winner is not the best choice from the social utility point of view. I can show you some examples afterwards.
I have a question, Karel. First of all, I think that strategic voting is a good thing, because that means that people can put some reasoning behind their choice. So first, not just emotion, but some rational reason. And second, again, it will serve consensus between neighbors, which is good as well. But I think the crucial thing in this system is turnout. How many people will come to vote? So we know that small turnout means that the most active voters show up to give their votes. That means that they are more radical, or sometimes it relates to their age. So, but if turnout is very low and small number of people come to vote, but they became even more empowered with votes. So they have not just one vote, but 3 votes to vote. So that means that small turnout will mean even more radicalization of the result.
Okay, so first, the two things. The first one, strategic voting. Yes, strategic voting might be good in some cases, in fact, yeah, but it really depends. It would be, of course, the optimum for the social point of view if people vote sincerely, but because others strategically, etc. There are situations where strategic voting is good if the voting system demands that. But with D21, there is not much room for strategic voting. That's even better. Okay. And for the second question, even if there were only a small number of people voting, it's still the result is better. Yeah. From the argument I was saying, I mean, I cannot explain that in detail, but it is. And I can tell you personally, I'm happy to make a meeting to explain more in details. But there is even better. The voting turnaround will increase. There is a very simple, obvious thing. Imagine that you can vote against. The rule is actually, in order to vote against a downvote, you need to put at least 2 upvotes. Yeah? But of course, it motivates people to come and to make a downvote because you want to express your negative attitude, and that you put multiple votes. Even without a downvote, which there are situations where it is not good to have a downvote. A situation of religious minorities, by the way, that's the only one practical I'm aware of. But for the upvotes, multiple upvotes, it's again, I can argue it's always at least as good as a standard voting system, but practically it's better. And the turnaround, even without the downvote, it will increase because like in Czech Republic or even in general, people are very disgusted because they are forced to vote lesser evil. In political parties, they have lesser evil, and many people don't go to vote because they just don't want to, because they don't feel they are forced to vote, they don't want to. But if you have the multiple votes, you are not forced to vote the lesser evil. So there will be actually more people participating. And we have that, this is not just theory, we have that even in practice as a feedback for people because we are running many studies in the field.
I had a question about the political CA in Turkey and Russia, and one of the things that you said was that the Russian response was spontaneous in part because they had kind of stockpiled information about what to use when the moment arose. And I was wondering, I don't know the work that you do generally, but are there countries that are better at stockpiling than others that you know of? Or I mean, is the stockpiling of information pretty similar globally?
Excuse me, I do not understand the essence of the question.
Okay. You said that Russia had stockpiled information about Turkey, and we have a president in the U.S. right now that isn't really politically savvy globally, and it seems like that's a piece of information that he might not quite realize. And I was wondering if all the other countries have, including the U.S., generally stockpile about the same amount of information, or are some countries less inclined? Because generally speaking, in the political realms, some countries play dirtier than others consistently, and I was wondering if you think that most countries are stockpiling information about other leaders constantly, or if certain countries are better at doing that.
Gathering information on them.
Do Russians have compromise on Trump?
You're selling fear.
It's not a question.
No, do you think Russia's better at doing that and more aggressive about doing that than other countries?
I think that all countries, and especially special service, usually stockpile information about other political leaders. They not, in any case, will open this information, but they stockpile, as far as I know. But in case of Turkey, what is interesting, that just minutes before the incident, Erdogan was described and was positioned in Russian media as one of the best foreign friends, having this information about him.
If your country has a personalized government or a dictatorship, so Russia or China or Turkey, where the leader is a very central figure in politics and for the statehood, does that make that country, that government, more vulnerable to character assassination attempts? Like, are they more likely to have grave effects on their interests and their feelings of being threatened? So, for example, In Switzerland, their leaders change pretty often, so if another foreign leader made a character attack against them, then I'm sure that the Swiss government, their political system wouldn't take that as a grave offense, as for example, maybe if President Xi was to be extremely attacked in China. Would a personalized government take character attacks much more seriously than any other one?
It was a question for whom?
I guess mostly for Egorova, because of the subject, but anybody can.
I think that a personal attack to foreign leader never is too effective if this leader is not interesting to the population of its own country of political leader, or if this leader is not so popular in his own country. Only in the situation of high interest of or the audience to this political leader, character assassination is effective. But in case of interference into the American elections, I think that it was not the main factor of election campaign of Trump. I think that he was elected not by Russia, but not because of character assassination campaign toward Hillary Clinton, but because of the interest of the big amount of American people in Trump and his agenda. That's why it depends on the position of political leader in his own country.
Oh.
If may I add, I think when we talk about the authoritarian leaders, about an attempt to character assassinate them, it's even used as an advantage of them for their society. They link themselves to the country and to their own society. They portray the attacks on themselves to the attacks of the country, and portraying the others as an enemy. So it actually helps them to mobilize their supporters towards them more, rather than to create any kind of distrust towards them. That's just my opinion.
All right, and finally we have this exciting moment.
Thank you. I'm thank very much for the opportunity to present here the results of the game. Let me say at the beginning, I was saying the joke about the planet. It was not a negative joke. Okay, the fact that the other was saying it will be over soon. It can usually people understand that it will be destroyed, that the humanity will get destroyed. But maybe it will be the up, that maybe we will change our beings towards global consciousness and global support and no fighting, and yeah, it's the ideal, but I believe that we have no choice, in fact, and maybe we need this push. So, and the results, the voting, I believe it's one of the tools that we can do. The results are very nice. In fact, yesterday, I'm normally optimist, and yesterday I was quite, the probability that we succeed went down, and I was a little bit sad. The reason being that out of, besides me and colleague, only 3 other people voted, so there were only 5 votes. I was very sad about that. But thank you, now we have 19 votes, which is, given the number of people here, is quite much better. Maybe, how can I see who voted? Okay, thank you. So still, yeah. So out of the 19 votes, the results are quite interesting, in line with what I presented. And again, this is, we didn't fake it, it's a fair test. So the result is that based on 1 vote, the winners, there were 2 winners for the nomination of the Democratic Party, and it was Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard.
How many votes?
19 votes, 19 people. Oh, 3. There were 2, 3. So it was very close.
So Sanders and who?
Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, however, if we take the multiple votes, the changes a lot, and the winner with 8, there are 2 winners again with 8 votes. One of them stays Bernie Sanders, so he is also conservative voter. But the even more conservative voter is Joe Biden. Those have 8 votes, and the other what was her name? is on the fourth place with only 4 votes in total. So apparently she's not that consensual. Now,
minus votes there?
there is, yes, I have minus votes. She didn't get minus votes. She just didn't get second and third vote. It's interesting.
We should have a look also later.
Yeah, we can
What
look.
Republicans and what Democrats were doing, right?
Of course. Yeah. And for the drinks, the results are even more profound, okay? So here, of course, 19 is not big enough number for statistical, but it makes sense here. Because we have with 1 vote, the winner is hop, the beer wins. Okay, with 1 vote, beer wins. Now, with multiple votes, not only that lemon wins with like a big chunk or a big head lemon wins, but not only that, but beer is the last. So the one that was first. So the example.
Some beer drinking.
I'm sorry, but beer is not a consensual drink. Many people gave it a down vote. Okay. There is even actually I can say for the results it's a little bit funny because it's apparently some people who gave vote to beer when there was only 1 vote, they didn't give vote to beer when there were more votes. Yeah, so the beer got fewer votes but it happens. Yeah. So these are the results. So just an illustration that the example was there. Thank you. Oh.
Who voted is invited for the
winning
consensual drink in the restaurant after.
All right. On this happy note, this panel is adjourned, and this conference is finally concluded. Thank you everyone for participation. We had a wonderful 3 days of this session. Thank you. So for beer drinkers and wine drinkers, we invite everyone to join us at 5 o'clock at Liberty Tavern here just down the street.